Hey everyone, and welcome to another Kano Reviews. Today we talk about one of the most influential games of all time for consoles and see if it has stood the test of time throughout all those years. We talk about Goldeneye 64, which in 2 years will be 25 years old. Talk about a classic. Not too long ago, I of course also reviewed Medal of Honor Frontline, which was very influential for other reasons. But playing that really made me want to go back to the beginning for where modern shooters on the console really got a face with Goldeneye. I have a weird history with this game, because when the game came out, I was very young. I was 6 years old. And the game was, for the time, pretty gory, with you being able to drive over enemies with a tank as they screamed in agony. I wasn't allowed to buy the game, but I was allowed to go to a friend's house and play it there, and eventually also borrow it for a couple of days to play it at home. I was so young that a lot of the English used I could not read, and therefore I often did not know what the objectives were, so I played the game a lot, but I almost never completed a level properly. That was different for its spiritual successor Perfect Dark though, as I was older and wiser, and so I could tackle that game easier. But so many years later, I revisit this golden oldie and have properly played through the campaign. Now, Medal of Honor has aged quite well in my opinion, with the game still being very cinematic and fun to play, only being hindered by an outdated control scheme. I was quite worried about Goldeneye though, because besides the obvious dated controls as well, it did not have the cinematic flair or the graphical fidelity of the earlier mentioned title. Weirdly enough though, the graphics did not bother me except for a few really ugly levels like Statue or Jungle, but we will talk about that in a bit. What surprised me was how technically impressive this game was for back in its day. The draw distance in some levels is really impressive, with some PlayStation 2 games releasing afterward that had a lesser draw distance than this. It also had a lot of interactivity with the environment, where you could blow up crates, bottles, and computers. It even had AI systems where they would rush over and push an alarm to get reinforcements whenever the enemy felt threatened. The blueprints for modern console shooters can definitely be seen here, and I can only imagine how mind-blowing this experience was for people who properly played this for the first time back in 1997. But there's one gameplay aspect that is really important in how Goldeneye distinguished itself from other shooters, and that is that it was objective-based. Shooters like Doom and Quake focus on just killing enemies and getting to the end of the level, but Goldeneye was about more than just that. Sometimes in particular levels, you needed to shut down a radio, or rescue hostages, or get a document in a safe by first locating the key. Many games after this, including Medal of Honor Frontline and Allied Assault, used this objective-based gameplay, and it has pretty much become the standard for story-driven shooters ever since. But another cool thing that Goldeneye does really well is its increase in difficulty, and I wish more games did it like this. Whenever you increase the difficulty, it will not only make the enemies harder, which is what most games do, but it will add new objectives to clear in the levels, giving it more replay value since you can go back to certain levels and be given new tasks. With the first level, for example, if you play it on easy, all you need to do is reach the end of that level. And if you play on normal, you need to reach the end of the level, but also take out all of the alarm systems. And then, if you play on hard, you need to do the two said things before, and also hack a computer. It's very cool and tells you how well designed the levels are to allow for such openness in mission structure. And I will tell you this, for the first 7 missions or so, I thought the game had aged surprisingly well, and was having a lot of fun. The first level eases you into it really well, and again impresses with its draw distance, but also simple things like destructible environments, and even neat effects like shadows, etc. The controls were indeed far from ideal, and are the worst part about this. You can customize the control scheme, but the N64 controller had only one joystick, making it not very good for shooters compared to today's layout. It does the same thing that was also used in Medal of Honor, where you can stand still by holding the shoulder button, and then you can aim with the crosshair across the screen. Initially though, you have an auto-aim system that works quite well, and you can get through the game in large portions using this. It isn't until the last 3 or 4 missions where you need to rely more on proper aiming, since there are so many enemies that do a lot of damage against you. Graphically though, what will freak most people out are the weird character models, and yes, they looked weird back then, and they still look weird and blocky now. If you can look beyond that, you are golden to play the rest of the campaign. No pun intended. The next level is inside a facility, and it does become apparent here that some of the more cramped levels are sometimes a bit of a hassle to traverse with very narrow staircases and walkways. It also becomes apparent that at times the game does want to tell a proper story like it does in the movie, but this was so early on that they did not have voice acting, and whenever this happens you just stand still looking at ugly characters as their dialogue appears on screen. By today's standards, it is not exciting at all. What's really good though with Goldeneye is the variety in missions and locations, something that is oh so important with shooters and something that has been mastered by a game like Medal of Honor Frontline. But Goldeneye also succeeds in this for the first hour or so. The third mission has you driving a tank around as you try to get to a plane to escape, and then the next mission you are in the open snow field as you need to shut down a communications dish and sneak into a bunker, only to find yourself on a ship mere moments later where you need to rescue hostages from being executed. It all feels fresh and new and keeps the pacing going with new objectives thrown your way each time. Then it does have the first misstep though, with the mission where you go back to the snowfield. Since the mission is a bit more open, the draw distance isn't great at all. It's foggy and ugly looking. It was fine to play this in an environment one time, but to come back here is a bit overkill and takes the fun away. There's a few levels like this, including Statue and Jungle, and they are really ugly to look at, so much so that they were my least favorite levels in the game by far. It feels like a foggy, muddy mess, and kinda was how I imagined the draw distance in this game was going to be, only to be surprised by the first mission. But the thing here, and something that some people might find annoying, is that for the mission objectives, you have no radar or map whatsoever. This was before something like that was a thing. This means you need to do some exploring to find your objective, and I do love exploring, so you didn't hear me complaining the first 7 missions or so. But some of the objectives require you to get something really specific, which can be easily overlooked, and you can end up searching for 20 minutes or so for that one small item that lays on the floor of a specific room as enemies keep on respawning. In some missions, you're also required to escort an NPC, mostly Natalia, and protect her from getting killed. The issue here though is that she walks very slowly, and if you go too fast and get out of her AI radius, she will run away on her own and you will have to find her again. It's very boring and has not aged well at all. Luckily, besides these 3 open and foggy levels, most other levels are very fun to play, with some highlights including the armored train and a level where you are driving a tank through St. Petersburg. You also sometimes need to use some gadgets like a camera or a laser watch, and though their usage isn't the most intuitive, it's still fun and does feel like James Bond. So overall, I think the campaign has really impressed me. But that was also mostly because I looked at it with rosy glasses and saw it for how it was for its time. It had awesome details that console owners hadn't seen before, like the ability to shoot off hats from enemies or them having separate animations depending on where you hit them. These, including also the objectives or destructible environments, are things everyone praises Medal of Honor Frontline for, but Goldeneye already did it 5 years prior. I also know that for many, Goldeneye's popularity came with the multiplayer, but I've never really been a competitive shooter guy, and though I had some fun with friends back in the day, I was simply too young to fully appreciate it. I'm a single player type of guy, then that's what I want to focus this video on, but I do recognize how important the multiplayer was too for split screen plug and play fun. So now on to the important question that I started the video with. Has the game stood the test of time? This is honestly very difficult to answer. On some ways, yes. The missions are fun and varied, with objectives that feel different each time and satisfying gunplay, but it has not aged well on other parts. Mostly the graphics, controls, and somewhat can be frustrating if you need to look for one particular item or door. If the graphics do not bother you, I'd say you can enjoy this game more than enough even for today. I think the environments look fine, but the characters do indeed look very ugly and are very rough to look at. But I could not deny that I was really having a lot of fun as the missions were so different, and every time I stopped playing, I kinda wanted to start it up again and to see what the next mission would entail. In the end, Goldeneye 64 gets a 7.3, a great score for an almost 25-year-old game, and one that surely would have gotten a 9 or higher back in the day. I think other games like Legend of Zelda and Banjo-Kazooie have aged a lot more gracefully due to their controls, timeless gameplay, and cartoony graphics. But of course Rareware made another important first-person shooter for the Nintendo 64 that everyone talked about, Perfect Dark. And having played Goldeneye again, I think it's time I also deep dive into the world of Joanna Dark once more.